Welcome back to another episode of Lost Codex Legends. My name is Jesse, and today we are talking about a character who many of you know. Many of you know from the classic days, many of you know from Cataclysm, from Heroes of the Storm. I'm talking about the Fire Lord himself, Ragnaros. Today, we're going to be exploring the story of Ragnaros the Fire Lord from his very earliest origins. All pre-Titans, pre-Old Gods, just elements. Through Cataclysm, and including Battle for Azeroth, where there's some interesting little tidbits that I will mention at the very end. Without further ado, let's dive into the Lord of the Firelands himself, Ragnaros. Ragnaros' story starts at the very beginning of Azeroth's history, when the elements warred against each other across a volatile, primordial planet. Of course, the Titan within Azeroth was newly born and sleeping, lurking within the core of the planet while the elements roiled and raged outside. Of course, there are 5 elements: the element of fire, air, water, and earth. And of course, the last one, the element of spirit. Because baby Titans, Azeroth in particular, are very hungry babies, the element of spirit was mostly consumed by Azeroth, and this caused an imbalance between the other 4 elements, thus turning them to angry, very chaotic, natured elements. While other worlds, where the spirit element isn't consumed or vastly absent, the elements tend to be more calm and peaceful. But not Azeroth. Each element type was ruled by an elemental lord. Ragnaros the Fire Lord, Alakir the Wind Lord, Therazane the Stone Mother, and Neptulon the Tidehunter. Now, out of the 4 elemental lords, Ragnaros was the most violent. He was the most brutish, the most angry, and of course this meant the other elemental lords hated him more. But that didn't matter when friends arrived, in the shape of old gods. Of course, the elemental lords enjoyed fighting each other, but when a couple old gods crash-landed on the planet and started spreading their armies, they weren't having it. This was their world to beat each other over, not some bags of flesh. And so the elemental lords teamed up in a strange unison to fight the old god armies. Ragnaros worked together with Alakir the Wind Lord to create vast firestorms that raged across Azeroth. Unfortunately, this didn't mean much, as the old gods ended up winning the battle, and the elemental lords were all enslaved. Shortly after this, the old gods created their Black Empire, and shortly after that, of course, the Titans arrive. Now, the Titans were too large and too powerful to fight the old gods themselves, or the elemental lords, and so created their armies of Titanforge. Now, before the Titanforge could get to the old gods and take them on themselves, they had to get to the elemental lords. And so the Titanforge and the leaders of the Titanforge, the Keepers, would team up together to bring down each of the elemental lords and not kill them, but overwhelm them. The Keepers Tyr and Odin fought together side by side to defeat Ragnaros. For weeks they clashed and dueled with the Fire Lord, eventually pushing him back into his little corner and defeating him and subduing him. Shortly after the 4 elemental lords were defeated, Highkeeper Ra and a Titanforge sorceress by the name of Helia worked together to create the elemental plane. They were going to imprison the 4 elemental lords rather than kill them, and each of the 4 elemental lords was banished to a different corner of the elemental plane. Ragnaros himself was banished to the Firelands. Of course, once banished to the Firelands, Ragnaros built himself a pretty swanky house. He called it Sulfuron Keep, this massive citadel of molten metal and fire. And after that, the other elemental lords did what they did best and just kept beating the snot out of each other. Because what else are you going to do? You're going to go for a swim in the elemental plane? No, everyone does that. You're going to fly a kite? You're going to... What do you do in the Firelands? Barbecue something? No. You fight and you beat each other up because that's what you do. And Ragnaros continued his next several thousand years just being angry in general. Ragnaros' anger was focused particularly on Prince Thunderon, who could be the son of Alakir, the son, or just another lesser lord of the wind elementals. Either way, through some betrayal by Baron Geddon and Gar, Prince Thunderon was forced into an encounter with Ragnaros, and it didn't go well. Ragnaros and Thunderon fought and clashed for ages, and in the end, Ragnaros ended up winning the battle. Ragnaros consumed most of Thunderon's power. What little remained of Thunderon's power was locked away within a small talisman, in which Ragnaros split that into 2 pieces, gave one to Gar, gave one to Baron Geddon, and that is relevant to the Thunder Fury questline in Classic. After that, Ragnaros just ruled in Sulfuron Keep, doing what he did best, being angry at everyone, and that happened for several thousand years. Ragnaros becomes relevant again in the story beyond the elemental plane when the War of Three Hammers happens. About 250 years ago, the Dark Iron Dwarves decide, we're gonna stir some shit up, and they decide to reignite the War of Three Hammers. They were evidently still bitter about losing Ironforge with the battles against the Bronzebeard clan and the Wild Hammer clan, and so they decide to start this whole battle. Sorcerer Thane Thorison and his wife Modgud decide to attack two different dwarven capitals instead of all focusing their attention on one, which would have been the smart thing to do. They decide, no, let's do two in one. Sorcerer Thane attacks Ironforge, his wife attacks Grim Batol. Unfortunately, Modgud was defeated at the battle for Grim Batol, and Thorison was forced to retreat from Ironforge back to his capital city, named after himself, Thorison. Because that's what you do, you name a city after yourself. Sorcerer Thane Thorison knew that the other two clans, Wildhammer and Bronzebeard, were coming for him. Ironforge was pissed that they had dared to march on them, and Grim Batol had suffered some spooky dark magic as Modgud had died, because she wielded, at the time, a very spooky knife. Both armies are now marching towards Sorcerer Thane, and he realizes, I can't hide in my stupidly named city for forever, and so he does something desperate. Thorison, who is desperate to turn the tide of battle, decides to call upon 7 of his most powerful allies. These allies are patriarchs and matriarchs of the Dark Iron Society, as well as others who happen to have great knowledge of different kinds of power. These 7, along with Thorison, decide to tap into ancient sleeping powers beneath the earth in hopes of finding something that could help them win against the battle. But Thorison, who is consumed by rage and sadness at the loss of his wife, confusion, desperation, all of this leads to the failure of the ritual, or perhaps the success, depends how you look at it, and the whole thing goes exactly as planned, as you can imagine. Instead of finding some ally beneath the earth to help them fight and win this war, they find Ragnaros, and Ragnaros is free from his banishment and called into the world by Thorison. Ragnaros has returned into the world, shattered the Red Ridge Mountains, and created the massive volcano we now know as
Blackrock Mountain, a Hearthstone adventure!
And on either side of it we have the Searing Gorge and the Burning Steppes. Of course, in these surrounding areas, firestorms and vast explosions raged on as Ragnaros was brought into the world, and these explosions not only destroyed the city of Thorison, but also killed Sorcerer Thane Thorison himself and the 7, who are now ghosts in the Blackrock Depths boss encounter. Now, without a leader, the Dark Irons are completely enslaved by Ragnaros. So, good job, buddy. Good job, Thorison. That's my commentary on the war. Now, even though the Dark Irons are enslaved, some of them are actually completely in awe of Ragnaros' power and are, digging what happened. Like, hey, that's pretty cool. That, did you see that explosion? That was sweet. And some of them actually revere and worship Ragnaros as a god. This disaster did have one good thing about it, and that was it completely halted the armies of Bronzebeard and Wildhammer, and they were not willing to face the terrifying might of Ragnaros and retreated back in the other direction. At this point, Ragnaros decides to take up residence within Blackrock Mountain, and eventually makes his way down to settle within the cozy, warm corner of the Molten Core. At some point after moving to the Molten Core, one of his elemental lords was really just tired of his shit. Lava Lord Rakor, doesn't matter, was tired of the backstabbing nature of fire elementals, and really just wanted out of there. In a risky gambit, he angered Ragnaros and was expelled from the Molten Core, which he was totally okay with, and ordered to guard Blackrock Depths alone. So he gets to bully some Dark Irons and doesn't have to stay with his other fellow fire elementals. Sweet deal. Good job, Rakor. Doesn't matter. You're a rock. Who cares? Fast forward to the classic days, where Ragnaros has stayed within Molten Core this entire time. Now, apparently his apocalyptic, forceful summons into the world has left him a little bit weakened, and even though he's still stupidly powerful, he's still pretty weakened compared to the days where he ruled over a decent chunk of Azeroth's primordial surface. And because of this, he is gathering his strength so he can once again burn away Azeroth and take it for himself. Within the Molten Core, there is a burning lake, and within this burning lake, Ragnaros is having one hell of a nap. This burning lake serves as a rift between the Molten Core and the Firelands, where elementals are able to pour easily into the Molten Core, thus giving Ragnaros the proper amount of elemental lords and fire lords to not only rule over the Dark Irons, but also keep everyone in check and cause havoc on the surface and, do what elemental lords do best and just be angry at everyone. Chief among Ragnaros' agents is Major Domo Executus, a elemental salamander reptile. We don't know, they're weird. Kind of like Naga, but not related to Naga at all. This cunning elemental is the only one capable of waking up Ragnaros from his nap, which seems like an awful idea, and probably don't recommend. Now, within the Molten Core stirs Ragnaros, and outside the Molten Core is Ragnaros' army of Dark Irons, who have been carving out a brand new city called Shadowforge City, which for the record is a much better name than Thorison City. And they've lived here for the last several hundred years, enslaved by the Fire Lord. Now, there's some contradiction here in terms of what Ragnaros and his Dark Irons did with the rest of the mountain. The original lore states that Ragnaros and his army of Dark Irons decided to wage war on the upper occupants of Blackrock Mountain, who were the Blackrock Orcs, and of course Nefarian and his Black Dragons. The contradiction here comes from Chronicle 3, which states that for more than a decade, there was a tenuous truce that prevented the Minions of Flame from waging war with the remains of Deathwing's brood, the Black Dragons in the Upper Spire, and the Blackrock Orcs. And the way I see it, we can have both the tenuous truce and the infighting going on in the Spire. If any Dark Irons or Fire Elementals crawled too far out of the depths and into the Upper Spire, or any Blackrock Orcs or Black Dragons went too far into the depths, obviously crossing of territories, clashing, fighting, some deaths happen. As long as it's not a full-on war, I think both Nefarian and Ragnaros would be pretty A-okay. But that's okay, because a full-on war happens anyway when the Alliance and Horde come in and ruin everyone's day, as we normally do. The original lore states that Ragnaros had uncovered the secrets of creating life from stone, and planned to use that to create an unstoppable army to conquer the whole of Blackrock Mountain. Again, that's classic lore, that's vanilla lore. It doesn't really make much sense. Well, why would he not make minions of fire over stone? Again, it's classic lore, so there's not a, it's really old stuff. Chronicle is new, so we're going to go with the truce happened more than not. During this time, while he's gathering power within the Molten Core, in Sulfuron Keep and across the Firelands in general, many of his elemental princes are just fighting each other because they got nothing else to do. They're battling each other for dominance in Ragnaros' temporary absence. At some point, Ragnaros sends one of his ambassadors to mind over the Dark Irons that are looking for relics from Uldaman, Ambassador Infernus. He sends Infernus to Angor Fortress, and this just goes to show that Ragnaros does have influence beyond the mountain. Wherever he can send his fire elementals or the Dark Irons, Ragnaros' bidding is done. Ragnaros' influence, of course, is cut short, as a giant target is painted on his forehead, as the Alliance and Horde is getting ready to officially raid the Molten Core. Of course, one of the core vanilla classic experiences. Raiding the Molten Core and killing Ragnaros is part of the world first that is going on in Las Vegas right now. Ragnaros, of course, is ill-prepared for this attack as the Hydraxian Waterlords recruit the Alliance and Horde after hearing tales of not only his plans to conquer Azeroth, but whispers of ancient treasures that can be found within his domain.